Lab Setup and Discord Server. For this training, we will be using the TryHackMe platform to access the lab challenges. TryHackMe is an online platform for learning and teaching cybersecurity through gamified labs. They have rooms for both complete beginners and seasoned hackers, incorporating guides and challenges to cater for different learning styles. So go ahead and visit the platform to create your account. Web Application Penetration Testing VM. Please make sure that you have a VMware installed in your machine. If none, then you need to download VMware Workstation for Windows operating systems or VMware Fusion for Mac OS. Once you have the VMware, create an account on TryHackMe platform and access our room in tryhackme.com/jr/ajwapt In the task number 1, download the Kali Linux VM image by clicking the Download Task Files button. The VM image is 7 GB with configured labs and tools. For the Web Application Penetration Testing Lab, it is accessible only by visiting target.labs on the downloaded Kali Linux VM, and clicking the specific vulnerability will redirect you to their page to start testing. Inside the VM, I already created folders for payloads and files and folders for tools. You will be using this during the testing activity in our training. Web Application Penetration Testing Discord Server. We have a Discord server for Q&A and information dissemination purposes. So please join to our server by visiting the link shown on the slide. Now, let's move on into the next video. Introduction to Web Application Penetration Testing. As you all know, web applications play a vital role in every modern organization, especially during the pandemic. Web apps collect and process different types of data, such as personal information, sensitive personal information, and even the confidential one. But if your organization does not properly test and secure the web application, adversaries can exploit weaknesses and compromise your web application. Web application penetration testing mimics real-world attacks using the tools and techniques commonly used by cybercriminals. In penetration testing, the penetration tester uses a combination of tools and techniques like the cybercriminals to test the security or bypass the existing security controls of the website application. The following are the main drivers of web application penetration testing. First one is the requirement for a regulatory compliance. Depending on the type of your business, there will be several compliances that you need to comply with. Next is pass a vendor assessment. There are some clients that will ask for a report or proof that your software or product has gone through penetration testing. Then, sometimes, due to significant changes to the business process, you must make sure that the changes in the application does not introduce new weaknesses, so you conduct penetration testing. And finally, security researchers are continuously looking for new vulnerabilities in different software technologies that we usually use in our application. So we conduct penetration testing to make sure that those vulnerabilities are identified and addressed quickly and effectively. The next slide is types of penetration testing. There are 3 types of penetration testing that is applicable to web application testing. We have black box, gray box, and white box. In black box, no information is provided to the penetration tester aside from the target. This is to simulate external attackers with no prior knowledge of the target environment, so they need to perform the whole process from information gathering to exploitation. In gray box, limited information is provided to the penetration tester, such as test login credentials to access the target. This is to understand the degree of access that authorized users can obtain and the possible damage caused by insider or privileged attacker. In white box, full information is provided. For example, the documentation of their API. This is to conduct a more targeted test on the application and properly identify vulnerabilities. The next slide is phases in penetration testing. There are many acceptable ways of grouping the actions involved in performing a penetration testing. Actually, several authors have suggested a reliable penetration testing phases activities. In 2002, according to YTC, organizations that plan to conduct a penetration testing must have a good preparation concerning the scope and objective of the penetration test. In 2003, the NIST Special Publication 800-42 released the 4-stage penetration testing methodology. In 2010, Kimberly Graves suggested 5 phases in penetration testing that hackers generally follow in hacking a system. In 2012, according to Wang LF and H. Ziku, there are 3 phases in penetration testing activities that a tester can use, and these are pre-attack, attack, and post-attack phases. For this training, we will be following the 3 phases in penetration testing by Wang LF and H. Ziku. 3 phases in penetration testing. First, the pre-attack phase. It involves the scoping and gathering of information. Basically, this phase focuses on working to ensure appropriate scoping with all sides understand the agreed terms and what this test entails before commencing the penetration test. Next one is the attack phase. It involves the scanning and exploitation of vulnerabilities. This phase focuses on the active part of the penetration testing. You will use automated tools, scanners, and performing manual testing to identify and exploit vulnerabilities. And lastly, the post-attack phase. It involves the risk analysis and report writing. This phase focuses on analyzing the security risks of all discovered vulnerabilities and writing a professional penetration testing report. In the next video, we will discuss the scoping in web application penetration testing. Scoping. Defining scope is one of the most important components of a penetration test, yet it is also one of the most overlooked. Neglecting to properly complete pre-engagement or pre-attack activities has the potential to open the penetration tester or his firm to a number of headaches, including scope creep, unsatisfied clients, and even legal troubles. Here are the 3 tips for how to improve scoping your pen test. First one, understand why the client wants to conduct a pen test. For example, are they trying to comply with PCI DSS compliance? Then you will focus more on finding vulnerabilities in the payment processes. Next one, determine which assets must be tested and how many assets. This will help you in assigning the tasks to each pen tester. If the asset is web application, then you need pen testers with certification in web application penetration testing. Last one is discuss the rules for the pen test activity. Basically, you need to know the what, when, and how of penetration testing. What types of tests are allowed? When will you be able to start conducting the testing? How far should the vulnerable asset be exploited? In the next video, we will discuss the scoping questionnaire. Scoping questionnaire. For general questions, these are the common questions being asked to a client before they proceed in penetration testing. So let's discuss each question. Why is the customer having the penetration test performed against their assets? For this question, your clients will let us know whether the test is for regulatory compliance, product launch, passing a vendor assessment, or identification of security vulnerabilities. Is the penetration test required for a specific compliance requirement? As discussed in the previous slide, if the pen test is for a specific compliance requirement, then the pen test team must focus on the requirements of that compliance. When does the client want the active portions, scanning, exploitation, etc. of the penetration test conducted? Since scanning and exploitation uses active method of testing, you might need to ask yourself if they will allow you to conduct testing during business hours, after business hours, or on the weekends. When would you like to start the penetration testing? This question is one of the key in defeating the scope creep or legal troubles. The client must state when they want to start the engagement. As you notice, I don't specify the end date for this question. This is because in some pen test service, the firm providing the pen test provides retesting activities, but there must be something to end the engagement. So to mitigate this risk, add a simple statement to the contract which mentions that all retesting must be done within a certain time frame. Some providers offer 30-day, like a month of retesting. So right after submitting the report to the client, the 30-day retesting period kicks in, and once the retesting period is over, then the penetration testing engagement is also over. Unless they requested for extension, then you need to have an appendix stating the extension of the engagement. Where do you want to communicate with the penetration testers during the penetration testing? During the pen testing activity, pen testers might ask some questions to clients, or clients might want to communicate with the pen tester. That's why both parties must agree where they want to communicate with each other. I highly prefer Telegram, Slack, Signal, or Discord, but it is really up to the both parties, the firm and the client. Who is the client's point of contact? It is also important to identify the main point of contact in the client side, so that if there are some questions, requests, concerns, you will know who to contact to. What is the client's biggest security concerns? In this question, you must understand what is the client's fear. Are they afraid that they might have a vulnerability that could leak user information, or else? Next one, is your software engineering team aware that a penetration test is about to be performed? Here, you will know if the test is announced or unannounced. There might be some advantages and disadvantages on this one. If announced, then the software engineering team might start securing some weaknesses that they know. If unannounced, then the testers will see the true security posture of the target's application. Then last one, in the case that the asset is exploited, how should the penetration testing team proceed? For this question, we will know if the client will allow us to further exploit the vulnerable asset. So we ask the following actions: performing a local vulnerability assessment, attempting to gain root or admin privileges, or performing brute forcing of accounts. Aside from general questions, we also have a set of questions for web application. How many web applications would you like to be assessed? This one is the important question, I guess, for this section, since some firms provide quotations based on the number of assets. For testing team, identifying the number of assets will help them identify how many pen testers do they need to assign for this project or engagement. Will the test be performed against a live production environment or a test environment? Some clients prefer performing the test in a test environment since they don't want to interrupt the service of their prod environment. But testing teams sometimes prefer testing the live environment since it will really help them validate the real security posture of the targets in the perspective of external attackers. What type of penetration testing do they need? Here, you need to identify if the client wants black box, gray box, or white box. If gray box, will there be any kind of documentation? If yes, what kind of documentation? So in this question, if the client prefers gray box, aside from test credentials, you could also ask for documentations like API documentation, guide manual, etc. But mostly this is being provided in white box, but you could ask for it though. And it will surely help your team when conducting the penetration test. Are there systems in the network not owned by the client that may require additional testing approval? If yes, please specify. There are some assets that are integrated with other system or software, and it must be identified so that your team or client could request for an approval before conducting a test. For example, as far as I know, you need to request for an approval in AWS if your client is using AWS as their infra, and if you are going to test the infra of your client, which is AWS. Are there any connected third-party applications? We ask this question to identify if there are third-party applications or services connected to the target asset, because most of the time, these third-party applications and services are being used as an entry point to compromise the asset. And lastly, does the client want role-based testing performed against their application? If so, what are the rules? For these questions, we want to know if there are user roles in the asset, because number one, we need to have different test credential for each roles. Number two, we need to know the differences between roles. And number three, we might spend some time testing privilege escalation attacks between those roles. In the next video, we will discuss the rules of engagement document. Rules of engagement. The term rules of engagement sounds intimidating the first time you hear it, but don't be alarmed. It is meant to protect both the client and the penetration testers. The rules of engagement, are also known as ROE, are meant to list out the specifics of your penetration testing to ensure that the both client and the engineers working on the project know exactly what is being tested, when it is being tested, and how it's being tested. Okay, so the what, when, and how. This document, the ROE document, consists of three main sections, which are ultimately responsible for deciding how the engagement is carried out. So what is included in the ROE? Permissions, test scopes, rules. So for permission, this section of the document gives explicit permission for the engagement to be carried out. This permission is essential to legally protect individuals and organizations for the activities they carry out. Test scope. This section of the document will annotate specific targets to which the engagement should apply. For example, the penetration test may only apply to certain applications but not the entire network. Rules. The rules section will define exactly the techniques that are permitted during the engagement. For example, the rules may specifically state that techniques such as phishing, social engineering are prohibited. Okay? Another important thing about ROE document is it must be approved or signed by both parties before the pen testers can begin the testing. Now, I added a link here, or a resource from SANS Institute, showing the great example of ROE document, which you can access online via this link. Now, let's move on into the next video and discuss about reconnaissance. Reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is one of the first phase activities, or one of the important activity in a penetration test, in which the pen tester tend to be like online detectives to find as much information as possible about the target asset. Any information gathered about the target may be the crucial piece needed to reveal a critical weakness in defense, or those information they gathered could be used for a later attack. In fact, in hacking and in cyber kill chain, reconnaissance is the first and one of the most important piece in the process. There are two types of reconnaissance depending on the type of interaction you want to achieve with the target asset. First one is the passive, and the next one is active. Passive reconnaissance is a method of collecting information without interacting with the target. In general, pen testers gather information from public resources like search engines. Okay, then Active reconnaissance, on the other side, is a method of collecting information by directly interacting with the target. So we usually use this by sending traffic, using different tools like Nmap, fuzzer tools, etc. Important thing to note here is that active reconnaissance without prior authorization is likely an illegal activity depending on your country. So be aware of that. Some pen testers and researchers are publishing and sharing their recon workflow. On the slide, I'd like to share the recon workflow of the two well-known people in information security. The first one is the visual guide to recon created by Nahamsek, employee of HackerOne. His workflow starts in asset discovery combined with OSINT to enumerate the targets, then he will proceed with the content discovery to look which assets are working, which assets are interesting, etc. He also suggests performing searching for information leakage in third-party services. Next one is the recon summary created by Jay Haddix, a former employee of Bugcrowd. His workflow starts in identifying IPs and domains of the target, then performing port scanning and visual identification. Once the list of targets are identified, he will conduct platform identification to identify the technologies used in the assets. Then he will perform content and parameter discovery. So these recon workflows are focused on web applications combining the passive and active method to collect information. If you are interested in other recon workflows, I suggest visiting the link below. It is a compilation of many recon workflows. For this training, I created this recon workflow to guide us in our recon process. Let's say we have our target, then the next step would be asset discovery to look for more assets under our target. Could be another domain, it could be a bunch of subdomains. Then once we have a list of target assets, we will proceed with the content discovery. So we will do HTTP probing, visual identification, technology profiling, fuzzing, URL extraction, endpoint extraction, and parameter discovery. In the next video, we will start discussing the asset discovery.